Hello everybody, this is Chuck, and I'd like to thank you for stopping by my shop for another video. Today is Valentine's Day, and there's not going to be any machining, and I understand that you may click off, but give me a couple seconds here. February 14th is a special day here in our household. It was the day my son Tim was born in 1990. He's passed on in 2019. I thought it was special to do a remembrance of Tim. So if you can hang on for a few minutes, there's a couple of videos in the very beginning that showed Tim in recent years. And then the remainder of the video is kind of a recap of lots of photos and a little bit of discussion. I basically talk over the photos and tell you about my son's life. Special needs kid that had multiple issues, and we talk about family life and Tim, special guy. So I hope you enjoy. If you click off, no harm, no foul. I understand you're here for machining, not for somebody's family life. But if you got some time to spend, then watch the video, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you understand the life of a special needs boy, man. Okay, take care, and we'll catch you next Tuesday. Thanks. Well, good morning, everybody. Let's see, I got my son Tim out in the shop this morning with me. This morning's a cleaning day out in the shop. Got my buddy Howie here too, and Tim's gonna watch his movie there, and I'm gonna try to get some cleaning done. And Howie will surveil the street, see what's happening out front. You tripped me, you son of a gun. You wise guy. You tripped me. You wise guy. Stick that foot out there and get me. Huh? Knock knock jokes. Hey! You're a wise guy over there, aren't you? You're a wise guy. Here it comes, wise ass. You're a wise guy. Wow, this is quite the sight. My wife came out to give Tim a drink while he's out here spending time with me. Thank you, Jolene.
Grab the bars. Grab the bars.
Go up. I'm going to meet you up top.
Grab the bars.
I'll meet you up top, okay?
Good job, Tammy. Grab the bars. Good. Wow, we're going to show Irene. Grab the bar again.
Go straight ahead. Attaboy.
Good job, Tammy.
Are you going to go fast? Yeah?
All right, Tim. Good job.
Hi, Tim.
You're going to see Dad now. Okay, climb up.
Oh,
there.
you're way
Oh,
up
put your
there.
butt up first. Yep.
You're way up there.
I'll hold it. Okay. Okay. You have to go first. Okay, and then I'll come after you. Okay. Bring your feet around. Here I come. Wow. Okay. Here comes Dad.
Uh-oh.
Timmy, Dad. Wow. Go fast, Timmy. Go fast.
Yeah.
Hands up. Feet up, Timmy. Feet up.
Yay.
Good job.
Okay, well, we're going to run through this picture album, and then I have some other pictures. And this is, as I mentioned, about my son Tim. He was born February 14th, 1990, Valentine's Day. And we're going to go through his pictures. So here he is after being born. And I'm going to move this album back and forth, and there he is with his grandmother. Now, Tim was, he had lots of birth issues when he was born. We have 2 healthy children prior to Tim, and my wife is the youngest of 10 siblings who all had many nieces and nephews, and nobody had any issues. And Tim, when he was born, he had quite a few medical issues. I'm going to move the camera here. Bear with me. There's a little picture of the guy when he was just born. There he is sleeping. So Tim was, when he was born, he had the following issues. He had a cleft palate. He had a retinal fold, which meant that he would be blind in one eye. He had a torticollis, so you can see how his head is tilted in these pictures. I was pulling it to one side. He had, I think, a dropped foot at the time, motor issues, and a tethered spinal cord, which we did not find out till years later. So why did he have these issues? Let's move the photos we're going on here. Here he is at his baptism. It's my wife, her brother, my daughter Melissa, and my son Tommy. So why did Timmy have medical issues that were unknown to us? Pregnancy was fine, no issues there. And it turns out that my wife, unbeknownst to herself, which we found out later when we started doing testing to understand what went on with Tim, my wife has translocated chromosomes. So you have a pair of chromosomes, and when they translated, when they moved, translocation, excuse me, when they moved, she ended up with 3-1. So when they went and translocated, it went like that. So he's his own trisomy, is what it's called. And it was always interesting learning it all. And it turns out I think my daughter has it, the trisomy, but she's healthy. And I think my granddaughter has it, so it's in the bloodline. I can't remember if my son has it also. I think he might. So had we done amnio, it would have shown that he had the number of chromosomes. So that was always a question why we didn't do that. It's something that we didn't believe in doing, and we would have had Timmy no matter what anyway. So in this picture, you can see he's already had, in this picture he's already had surgery for his cleft palate. That had already been done. That was done at 6 weeks old. And then he ended up having surgery on the dropped foot. So here he is with a cast already. You'll notice you see in pictures, he always has a bib on, and he drooled for years and years. And you can see maybe in this picture here where's the torticollis and how his ear kind of stuck out on that side, and that tended to go away years later. Here he is with one of the nieces holding him when he's a youngster. I'm going to try to go through this relatively quick. So there he is, always a happy kid. Now, loud noises, he did not like. That was problematic. He had special chairs and stuff that we had to get for him, and there's a picture of his brother Tommy and Tim together, and there is looks like his first birthday. Now, by his first birthday, you can see the head tilt there still, and his problem with his foot. Of course, he's drooling. Well, when he was almost a year old, or right around a year old, we had met with Stanford's craniofacial surgeon. Your skull is developed by your brain. Your brain is what shapes your skull. His brain hemispheres are 2 different sizes. So at a year old, We had done multiple studies, high scans, all the top stuff that could be done. And we were in a room with the craniofacial, the palate surgeon, about 8 doctors. And we were scheduled to do craniofacial surgery where they were going to basically take the top of his head, pull his face down, rebuild his eye socket, and rebuild his skull. And I just asked the question, will he ever know who he is? If he doesn't, then we don't need to know. So if he'll never know who he is, then we don't want to do the surgery. And so the surgery was canceled. Let's see. There's me playing with him, and I got to tell you. So I'm going to skip a little bit here. They start very early education for kids with special needs, and one of the times we're meeting with the staff, they said, "Well, geez, Tim can't stack blocks. We put blocks down and he knocks them over, but he can't stack them." And I looked at him and I said, "That's because of me. To engage with my son, I would stack blocks and tell him to knock them over, and he'd think it's funny and we were having fun. That's why he doesn't stack blocks." Tim was a very resourceful and smart person. Interesting. He couldn't talk. He could talk. He could say hello, Dad, and stuff like that. He could not ever tell us if he was hungry or sick or in pain. None of those things he could ever communicate with us. He did learn sign language, and there was he knew some sign language, but it was always a difficult thing for communication because we didn't know. He couldn't say, "Hey, I don't feel good," or "My stomach hurts," or we never could have that. So it was always trying to read what was going on with him. He loved his toys. He had music boxes, and he played with all sorts of toys. You can see there his head tilts still. So we ended up doing surgery on his neck for that head tilt. That was also done. And another picture of him and my son. And then I'm going to jump around a lot on this, but if you notice here he's a little bit older, and I just wanted to talk about this picture. When he was young, he climbed out of his crib and ended up on the floor, flipped over the top. So we cut the legs off of the crib so the crib sat on the floor, but he could still go over the top. So I did like a boxing ring around the top of his crib out of PVC pipe so that he couldn't climb out of his crib. Now Tim, we couldn't say, "Hey, get in bed and you stay in your bed." He's going to go where he wants to go and do what he wants to do. So he was kind of in a corralled area when he was sleeping. Of course, we had monitors so we could hear him. This was before you'd had video monitors, but we had we could hear, and you could hear the music playing and the TVs and stuff like that. Later years, when we remodeled our house, in his bedroom, and I don't know if it'll show up in the pictures, but he basically had a 42-inch high fenced, call it a fenced area, a gated area for his bed and everything, so that we could sleep at night. So we'll move on, going kind of slower. I'm jumping around on a lot of different things here. He liked the bathtub, and he learned there's a unit down there in his pants. And generally a happy kid, and he didn't like the dogs. He didn't like the grandkids when they came. I'm going to run through these baby pictures. We had toys like you can't believe. Here he is So he's had surgery again. He's older now on his club foot. We're at the hospital. There's my wife and one of the aides from the hospital. But there looks like he's had surgery. This was probably at Stanford. I think only on the one foot. He ended up with a dislocated elbow. And at one point he actually had surgery on his elbow and on his foot at the same time. Now, his main mode of transportation as a youngster was scooting on the floor. Here he is with my wife sitting at the desk there. You can see he's always drooling, and there with my wife and an aunt in our kitchen. And let's see, this looks like a birthday. I don't know what birthday that is. But what I was getting at, though, is his main transportation for himself was scooting on his butt. And I learned very early when he was just scooting down the hallway. We have a step down in our living room, and he was maybe a year old. And he couldn't figure out how to get back up the step. And I went over and turned him around and put his hands on the floor so he could lift himself instead of having his feet above him. And that was it. He knew how to do it, so he could learn things. He was a MacGyver on stuff, on how he figured stuff out. This is a little later years, fantastic aide. And why I mention aides, you're going to see them in here and I'll point them out. Through his life, we had just fantastic people that helped us with Tim. Here's his special chair. This was in a special needs class. Now, talking about a special needs class, here's Tim again. So you can see there, he's walking. Ron used to really work with him, and you're going to see some other things here where he's actually running. This is, he must be about 6 there, I think. Here's another photo. This is Tim. He's older here. I can't think of his name. He was another aide. He was his teacher at school, or his aide at school, and just a great help. This was one of the caretakers, and this is a brother-in-law, my wife's youngest brother, or next oldest brother to him. And you can see Tim's in a wheelchair. He spent most of his time in a wheelchair as he got older, scooting on his butt. He could walk, as you see here, just simply holding onto the back of his shirt, he could walk. But you had to hang on to him, because if he fell down, life would not be good if he starts hurting himself. So we were always cognitive of that. There he is, me, my son, my 2 sons, his cousin James that he just really, really loved. And let's see, here he is, 6 years old at school for a Halloween parade. And when I mentioned about him being able to run, there he is at like the Special Olympics. And there's Ron with him, and he was running. Ron would take him. He would take him with a walker, and he would walk around the track. He'd walk a mile when he was young. There's another birthday coming up, and there he is. He's getting older. He always had his Pooh Bear and just loved all the Sesame Street stuff. Now that was one of the things too. You couldn't touch his head, okay? He would go crazy touching his head. That's because from day one, because of the craniofacial surgery, everybody was handling his head. So thinking about that, haircuts when he was a kid, you can see here his hair's fine in these photos. But haircuts as a kid was like a National All-Star Wrestling, trying to hold him down, and why the young lady would try to cut his hair, and it was quite an adventure. Later on in life, his Uncle Jim, who lived with us and helped take care of him also, got him to settle down. Now, you can see he has a drink in his hand there, and you'll notice in all these, he's always got a drink. feeding him, because of the cleft palate issue, which was repaired, he always had a gag reflex. And so with the gag reflex, we used to feed him all sorts of smoothies and things. We'd grind stuff up and try. And only Jim could feed him. My wife was the administrator. Jim was the kind of the commandant to get him to do some stuff. And me, I'm the play guy. So he wouldn't do anything for me in the sense of that. So it was always a problem feeding him. So we ended up going to a full liquid diet for almost his whole life. He always liked going down to the park and playing on the slides. These are older. We'd go out for Halloween. This was one of our caretakers. We had a few girls from Ethiopia that would come and help with us, and they were fantastic, fantastic ladies. And one of the stints in the hospital. Spent many, many months in the hospital. Years. So let's talk about hospital for a second. Go back. There'll be more, but Tim had developed into CVS, cyclic vomiting syndrome. So before we talk about that. Let me stop the camera, and we're going to go through more pictures, and I'll have some discussions. Well, I've switched over to my computer now with the photos. Here's a picture of Tim in bed. And these are going to be just a whole bunch of photos, okay, as we go through. And I started to mention about CVS, cyclic vomiting syndrome. Before I talk about that, let's also mention that he would have seizures, and he started that very early on. And of course, when he would have seizures, he would vomit also and gag. Never could tell when they were going to happen, how bad they were. He was on medication, and it always came back down to sleep. And so within our household, everything worked around Tim's sleep patterns. Kids would get yelled at not to make noise. As I mentioned, we didn't lock our front door. People would just walk in our house. They knew not to knock. They just knew to come in. We didn't slam doors, anything like that. Everything based around Tim and his sleep, because lack of sleep ended up producing seizures. And so he was on meds for that, and always a concern. The CVS developed a little later in life, cyclic vomiting syndrome, where, again, he couldn't tell us how he felt or anything, and then he would just start to vomit. Now you can see in all the photos, he's not much. He's a tall kid. He's almost a little over 6 foot, but I don't think he ever got above buck 40 in weight. And we did everything we could to keep liquid in him and feeding him, but we could not control the cyclic vomiting, and that's what basically was his demise at the end. That there was just no way to stop it. We spent months in the hospital, because when he would vomit, then he would get infections, and then they'd be on the drugs, and so I can't tell you how many times the poor kid was stuck with IVs. I mean, sometimes it would take 8 times to get an IV in him. The multiple trips. We'd go to the hospital. He'd be in for 2 weeks, out for a week, back in for 2 weeks. Went on for years. He really suffered. But and again, he couldn't tell us how he felt. He'd hug you and everything. He knew he loved you. That was certain. Again, here, just all these various photos of his life. The aids that we had were very good. My wife was the super champion of all time. We fought for inclusion in school, or I said she handled most of it. But hell, he lived with healthy people, and we felt that he should be in school with normal kids also. We actually sued the school district and won, and then it's a whole thing of monitoring it. But he we tried to live the most normal life we could that we could. He Again, I said about MacGyver earlier. I changed the lock on his bedroom so he couldn't get out and out of the area, and he would figure it out. And just depending upon his moods and stuff. Um, what can I say? Just I'll talk about these are later photos of there's me and Tim in the fooling around there at the bar. It's an earlier photo with his brother. There's a very early photo with his grandmother sitting in his wheelchair. My brother-in-law Jim, would take him fishing, so he would go out. There he is drinking like typically out of a straw. That's one of the times when he was still really able to get and walk some. There's two of the aides that from Ethiopia that helped us. This is an au pair from Germany, Jens, our first one, that came and helped us. He was fantastic. When Tim was just a little guy, we had a couple of au pairs, and Tim would sit at the table and stuff, and then in the hospital. We were in the hospital. It's his older brother, Thomas. As you can see there, he had a recorder. He loved watching DVDs, and so he would watch DVDs and just flip those DVDs in and out and in and out. If you liked one, he'd take it out. As soon as you kind of said, hey, I kind of like that one, he would take it out. These are in high school.